On this episode, we talk with a Maryland state delegate about pedestrian legislation. Then we visit the Center for the Visually Impaired in Atlanta. A professor at Princeton uses human-powered transportation to teach engineering. And finally, we look at absurd sidewalk designs. Stay tuned. We're in Bethesda, Maryland, talking with Bill Bronrott, who's a delegate to the General Assembly.
How are you?
You've been there 2 years now.
Yes.
What happened for pedestrians in your first year?
Well, the good news was that we were able to pass a bill that removed a long-time cap on the amount of state money that we could spend on building sidewalks in Maryland. There had been a $2 million cap on sidewalk construction along state roads for many years, and in my first year, we passed a bill that removed the cap.
Nice start.
Yes.
Okay, this year, what happened this year for pedestrians?
Well, more good news. This year we passed a bill to really focus on bicycle and pedestrian access throughout the state of Maryland, and to really elevate this issue inside of state government and inside of our state Department of Transportation. The bill that we passed this year, the Bike Ped Access 2000 bill, it requires that the Secretary of Transportation has to have a director of bike ped access in his office. And so this really helps elevate the issue and the needs right up where they need to be in the Secretary's office, and so we have a place to go to voice our concerns about these issues, and it gives us a start when it comes to really looking around the state to find ways that we can spend our money in smart ways to build the kinds of sidewalks and bikeways that can really connect communities to our roadways, and to really encourage smart growth, which is a very important aspect to our planning and growth in the state of Maryland, and to really make communities sort of self-sustaining rather than encouraging more senseless suburban sprawl.
And this wasn't the only bill that was considered this session.
Yes.
What went on during the session? What was the process?
Well, we had another bill that I and my state senator, Brian Frosch, sponsored that would have dedicated a certain percent, 3% of our transportation trust funds to building walkways, pedestrian ways, and bikeways throughout the state of Maryland. It was a very bold initiative. Maryland is not used to earmarking money, and certainly not in amounts that of that amount for pedestrians and bicyclists. But I really think that what we did by introducing that bill is to help educate the key committees that oversee this policy. And I think we won the hearts and the minds of members of those key committees on the needs when it comes to pedestrian and bike access and safety in Maryland. And I think that bill paved the way for the passage of the Bike Ped Access 2000 legislation that was signed into law by Governor Glenn Denning in May.
How popular was it? Did it pass by a very wide margin?
Oh, the Bike Ped Access did extremely well in committee and on the floor of the House and the Senate. I just think that people saw that it was a common sense bill, that we need that kind of coordination inside of state government. We need to elevate these issues within state government because it really has a lot to do with our quality of our lives, our environment, and of course the principles of smart growth. It just made a lot of sense, and so I was very pleased to see that we were able to get this bill passed this year, and I think it will help pave the way, perhaps literally, for further action in the years to come, when because we really do need to focus on more sidewalks, more pedestrian access, more bike access, and on pedestrian safety throughout the state.
Speaking of pedestrian safety,
Yes.
there's an initiative going on here in Bethesda in your district.
That's right.
What's happening?
Well, I have the privilege of representing the Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Friendship Heights communities in the Maryland General Assembly, and we have a very special effort in our district that I think is going to be the beginning of something very special in our county, in our state, and in our region here in the Washington area. You know, for years, pedestrian safety has been sort of a backbench issue. And I think now that we are seeing more and more people returning to the streets of our community as we look to create more of a town center atmosphere all around our community, taking that approach versus sort of the suburban sprawl that we've seen too much of. You're seeing people now flocking to these new town centers in record numbers, and along with that, a lot of car and truck and bus traffic. And so it's really incumbent upon us as government officials to make sure that that is not a lethal mix, that it's a friendly mix of pedestrians and motor vehicles. And so what we've done starting here in the Bethesda area, in fact, starting right here at this intersection, we've launched a pedestrian safety campaign that provides safety tips for pedestrians and motorists alike on how they can walk smart and drive smart. The theme of our campaign is drive with care and walk with caution. And we've brought together state and local government, the business community, civic associations, neighborhood groups, and concerned citizens to join together in a coalition in our area to really focus on pedestrian safety. And it's my hope that this will spread throughout our county and that our state will look to us as a model for things that need to happen from Baltimore to Cumberland to Annapolis and all around. And I think there's a lot we can learn from communities that have already had great successes, such as Portland and Seattle and other communities that have already instilled the right attitude that pedestrians come first. And that's what we need to do here on these East Coast cities, starting right here in Bethesda. I'm proud to say we're getting very serious about that.
We're in Atlanta, Georgia, talking with Janet Barlow, who's manager of rehabilitation services at the Center for the Visually Impaired. What is the center?
Center is a rehabilitation center working with blind and visually impaired people of all ages. We provide training in activities of daily living, orientation and mobility, computer skills, communication skills, various activities. Most of the clients served by my program are individuals who recently lost vision and are needing to gain skills in order to be able to do the things they've been doing before. There's also programs for elderly individuals, for young children and babies, as well as teenagers, recreational activities to get them introduced to other individuals who are blind and visually impaired.
And when your clients are traveling around their neighborhood, do they use canes? Do they use guide dogs? What's typical?
Typically, our clients will be learning to use a cane. Most of our clients haven't had skills in orientation, mobility, and travel skills before they come to the center. So they're learning to use a cane. They may be relying on other people and using human guides at first, and then begin to learn to use a cane. A person has to have the skills in using a cane as well as the orientation skills involved in that, to figure out where you are, to figure out the traffic and be able to get to where you want to go before they could get a dog guide. And only 5% of people who are blind and visually impaired can use a dog guide. Dogs walk fast. You have to give the dog direction. You have to be willing to exercise the dog on a regular basis. And so very many people can't adequately use a dog. Also, if somebody has a lot of usable vision, they often can't use a dog guide because they're going to contradict the dog. They have to give a dog a command forward and then they have to follow the dog. The dogs are only trained, though, to do things like just keep a straight line down the sidewalk and stop when they get to a street. The owner has to give them the directions to the store. You don't say, go to the store. You give the direction of a forward, a right, or a left to the dog.
And another misperception people might have, do guide dogs read traffic signals?
No. The blind or visually impaired person has to have the training we provide in figuring out the traffic, figuring out when the proper time is to cross. And the way they do that is by listening to the sound of the traffic, hearing the cars starting up on the street that's parallel to their travel path, and working with that traffic to cross the street, using that traffic for their alignment to cross as well. And somebody using a cane or using a dog guide or not using either of those methods needs to use often the traffic sounds and the traffic movement to cross, because they may not be able to read those walk, don't walk signs or see the traffic light. So often for somebody even who doesn't use a cane or a dog guide, we work with them in our orientation mobility area and how to figure out the traffic and how to use the traffic flow to determine the proper time to cross.
Modern intersections seem to be getting more complex with turn lanes and complex phases. Does that create a problem for someone trying to cross the street?
Yes, it does. Actuated intersections and needing to push a button, which you often can't find in order to get the pedestrian timing on a light, has caused a lot of problems for individuals who are blind or visually impaired. Many intersections, if there's good traffic flow on both streets or even on one of the streets, the one they're walking beside, blind or visually impaired people can use that traffic and cross independently without any difficulty at all. The problem's usually in areas where there's more intermittent traffic, or maybe only one car pulling out from a side street, that the blind pedestrian may not have time to get across the larger street unless they find the pedestrian push button and push it to hold the light for longer. And then they might push the button and then there's no car coming at that light cycle, and so they don't get the cue they need that the light's changed and that it's their turn to cross.
Engineers are a clever bunch. Have they come up with any solutions for that?
One of the solutions that's been used in many situations is what's called audible pedestrian signals or accessible pedestrian signals. There's a number of different versions on the market now. What's mainly been used in the U.S. for the past 25 years is what we in the blindness field refer to as the cuckoo chirp signals. It's usually a cuckoo or a chirp at the ped head, the pedestrian walk don't walk light. Sometimes those have caused problems because they're so loud that they drive the neighbors crazy, and because they're so loud that the blind or visually impaired person can't hear the sound of traffic or cars that are turning, that they still maybe need to use. There's some other types of accessible signals on the market now. There's one type is a type that has the sound comes from the pedestrian push button and has what's called a locator tone on it, so that the blind pedestrian arriving at the street can hear a quiet, about 10 to 12 feet away, they can hear a quiet locator tone that indicates there's an accessible signal there and that they have to push the button in order to get a pedestrian timing on the light. Using that, a blind pedestrian can find the button, push the button, then when the light turns to the walk sign for the pedestrian, usually the tone speeds up to let them know that it's time to walk. Some of the accessible signals available have a spoken voice message that says walk sign. So there's various developments along those ways. That type of signal has been used in Australia and Europe for a number of years, but hasn't been installed regularly in the United States. It's now just become to be commonly available in the United States. Another type of accessible signal is one where the blind or visually impaired person carries a receiver that they would use to, they could point that at the walk don't walk sign and would get a message giving them the information about the status of the sign. Problem with that is somebody has to carry more things. They're already maybe working with a dog and a cane, and they have to also be able to point the receiver at the sign and find it. And they don't necessarily know that there's one there.
Other than intersections, between intersections, how would a blind pedestrian navigate along the sidewalk?
Blind pedestrian would use their cane or dog and traveling along the sidewalk. They're often still listening to the sound of the traffic for their alignment ability, listening to how far away from them the traffic is, and to stay kind of centrally aligned in the sidewalk. Sidewalks that are broken up or are blocked because of construction or have very rough areas or narrow areas can be a problem, or lack of sidewalks. Without sidewalks, for a blind pedestrian, it's very difficult for them to travel, particularly alongside a busy street. Quiet street, yeah, you can walk in the street okay, but for some of the busy streets where we don't have sidewalks, basically blind pedestrian is, or visually impaired pedestrian is unable to travel because holes in the mud path and things like that can cause them serious problems.
We're in Princeton, New Jersey, talking with Barry Royce, who's a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at the university. You have a course on human-powered transportation. What can students get out of a course like that?
Well, my objective in running this course is to make students think about their prejudices about human power and what it can do, and to look at the machines, the bicycles that they proudly spend their hard-earned money on, and to ask questions: why did I spend that much money for this feature? Has it done anything for the performance of my bicycle or not? And I want them to be able, during the course, to develop methods to evaluate those questions in a fairly quantitative way. That's the essence of an engineering approach to problems.
First thing you need to look at is how much power can a human produce?
Well, that's one of the most exciting first laboratories we do. We have essentially a dynamometer which we attach to the rear wheel of a bicycle, and everyone in the course has to pedal for 10 minutes as hard as they can. Now that doesn't really sound very much. The average strong college student should be able to do that quite easily. They get reasonably discouraged when they find out that they're like two light bulbs connected together, about 200 watts maximum power or sustainable power. And by the end of 10 minutes pedaling, they're normally sweating fairly profusely. We're unkind to them. We don't have a fan in the room. And they feel muscles that they probably have not used in that degree of intensity for some period of time. And I think it brings home what it means to be a 200-watt power source. I'm much more modest. I can put out around about 100 watts reasonably comfortably for about the same period of time. And actually, considering I'm significantly older than they are, it's really about what one would expect. They're at the peak of their power generating capability, and I'm afraid I'm way over there.
What can you do with 200 watts? I mean, what's been accomplished with human power?
Well, in terms of bicycles, bicycles with aerodynamic shielding on them have reached very high speeds, 50 miles an hour or more. If you're going behind a big flat plate being towed by a train, you can do the more, but if you're fighting against the wind in your own streamlined vehicle, 50 miles an hour isn't very bad. People have, for instance, propelled boats at high speed on the Charles River. The MIT group has done a lot of hydrofoil studies, human-powered hydrofoils, and they have world speed records in that type of vehicle. And then, of course, McCready and his people with aircraft have done a number of remarkable flights. I personally feel that the one going from England to France was very remarkable. And people have gone from, the Daedalus flight in the Greek island region. And actually, I have a photograph, and I'm not quite sure where it came from, of a human-powered passenger plane. Some cyclist powering this device had got his girlfriend riding pillion in this aircraft, and it's one of my treasured photographs of a human-powered passenger aeroplane.
But getting back to terrestrial bikes, what sort of principles can you investigate with an ordinary bicycle?
Well, with an ordinary bicycle trying to travel at a fairly high speed and without any aerodynamic aids associated with it, the air resistance is one of the main energy losses if you're riding on a level road. If you're trying to go uphill, clearly just lifting your weight up the hill is where most of the effort goes, and we have gear systems on bicycles to help us deal with that. But in terms of bicycle speed, it really is the problem of overcoming aerodynamic drag. And to make students appreciate this fairly early in the course, I sort of cheat a little. I have a radar gun so we can measure how fast they can go on a bicycle, and they enjoy getting outside in the fall weather and riding as fast as they can. But then we put a 1 meter square, a 3 foot by 3 foot piece of Lexan plastic, transparent plastic, on the front of the bike, and that increases the aerodynamic drag very significantly. And instead of being able to do, say, a top speed of 25 miles an hour on the short piece of track that we measure them on, they find their top speed comes down to somewhere between 15 and 20 miles an hour, depending on how hard they are prepared to pedal. And I think also they notice differences in the stability of the bicycle. With this big flat plate on the front, it makes the steering very uncertain. There's the air spills off one side of the plate and then the other, and so you begin to get a tactile sense of why it's important to do certain things on bicycles, and who your enemies are. Hills are your enemy, air resistance is your enemy, and so on. And so we ride in crouched positions to minimize air resistance. We put very lightweight streamlined plastic shields on the front of the bike to reduce air resistance. And actually we have some local bicycle people who are building streamlined bikes, and they come and give us a demonstration and indicate how much further a streamlined bike can coast than, say, this bike that I've got here, with a rider starting at the same speed in both cases. So it's quite an interesting sort of set of issues there.
And beyond streamlining, you get a bicycle like this and want to find out, mechanically, are you better off buying this than a cheap bike from Kmart or somewhere? What would you be looking for in evaluating a bicycle like this?
Well, most people are looking for snake oil, and they really want to feel good, and that's tends to be why we buy the cars we buy, unless we're really, really sensible people, which few of us are. I got this particular bicycle because it's got a very different structure than the normal tubular bicycle. It's a lightweight bike. It's made of carbon fibers and epoxy. And I put a wheel on the back, which is again a carbon fiber epoxy wheel, rather than the spoked wheel that is the normal wear of a bicycle, and we have one of those on the front. What I want people to do is to say, well, oh, this has got such a nice streamlined shape, and then ask, well, does it make any difference when you are this big, bulky, wind-deflecting thing and you're sitting on this? How important is the frame drag compared to you? And I think that the whole thrust of what I want them to do is to question all these things. So the bike weighs a pound less, but I paid $1,000 more for it, or whatever the right numbers are in those cases. What am I going to get out of that? Can I evaluate what I get out of it? Do I want to ride it up hills all the time? Or am I being mainly a downhill rider? I've had some mountain bike students working with me last semester, and they didn't mind a heavy bike. It helped when they were going downhill to help them go faster, and things of that sort. So I want people to think fairly critically about those issues. Would I pay $500 for a pair of fiberglass wheels? Well, at the back, they're not too bad. On the front, people tell me, I've not ridden them far enough to really know whether that's true, that in a crosswind, they make the handling of the bicycle relatively uncomfortable. And so I think that one needs to ask always, am I buying something that is valuable, that will really improve the engineering system? I suppose you have to include yourself in that engineering system. If you pedal harder because you feel good, maybe you are improving the engineering system. Or is it just something that I'm doing there because I like the look of it?
The natural way for people to walk is in a straight line toward their destination. You send a lot of pedestrians across a grassy field, they will tend to wear a straight line to the other end. If you pave a crooked path, pedestrians will tend to wear a straight line, shortcutting across the bends. Landscape architects haven't figured this out. For some reason, they can't resist putting a curve in the sidewalk. We were out in Fremont, California recently, where there are a couple of bad examples. In one case, along a major arterial, sidewalk is set back a few feet in some places, and then up tight against the curb for the next stretch. Away from the curb, close to the curb, back and forth the length of the street. Pedestrian walking along here will find the sidewalk set back away from the curb much more pleasant than the sidewalk closer to traffic. The average pedestrian would have been much happier with a straight sidewalk away from the traffic. Another example in Fremont, sidewalks designed as a sine wave, constantly curving back and forth. Have you ever seen a pedestrian walk in a sine wave across a blank field of snow? I don't think so. But one of the worst examples we've seen is right behind me. We're along Canal Point Boulevard in Princeton, New Jersey, where the landscape architect wasn't content to make the sidewalk curve back and forth. He created a series of little artificial hills and had the sidewalk go up and down the hills as well. I don't know what the landscape architect had in mind, but the average pedestrian carrying a bag of groceries, pushing a baby stroller, or even in a wheelchair is not going to appreciate all those extra hills to go up and down. Landscape architect has to realize that walking and sidewalks, infrastructure for walking, are part of transportation, and for transportation to be effective, it has to be efficient.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.